The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. Good afternoon again, Mr. Gove.
Oui, Monsieur le Président, je suis prêt.
The President, thank you. We would like now to proceed, and the Chamber wishes to hand the floor over to the prosecution.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, and to all of you here, and good morning to you, Mr. Joffre. Good afternoon to all parties. My name is Vincent de Wilde. I represent the Office of the Co-Prosecutors, and I have a few questions to put to you. And some of these questions, in fact, will follow up the questions that were put to you by Judge Laverne earlier. My first series of questions focusing on your testimony in defense of Kesampan, E190/2.5, and it's dated 15 October 2010. That is to say, 1 month after the indictment for this case. So could you tell the Chamber in a few words if you are the one who took the initiative to contact Kesampan's defense in order to draft this testimony in support of Kesampan, or if it is Kesampan's team that contacted you to write this quote-unquote testimony in support of Kesampan? Answer: I was in contact with Jacques Vergès, who had asked me to provide to him some information on what I may know of Cambodia and Cambodia's relationship with Vietnam. And then I proposed to draft a statement in support of Kesampan. Question very well. And between the date of this written statement, 15 October 2010, and today's hearing, have you had any other contact with members of the Kesampan defense? Well, answer: last week I met Counsel Verken to know a little bit how today's hearing would be conducted. I was told that I would be questioned on my statement, and just to know how the proceeding was going to be conducted, that's all. Fine, says the prosecutor. Other question. I have read your statement, and you spoke about many encounters with Kesampan between 1957 and 1959. And also in 1990, 1992, and then you stayed at his home several times in 2005 and 2006. Can you describe your relationship with Kesampan as a friendship? Answer: yes, we had very friendly relations. Question: and is it because of this friendship and of these shared memories that you accepted, or that you even proposed to testify in writing and orally in his support? Answer: yes, I must say that my friendship was based on my esteem for Kesampan, whom I had known in Paris and who I saw again in Cambodia, and I understood his devotion to his country. Question, can we say that as of Khieu Samphan's flight into the Maquis in 1967, which corresponds to the time when you left Cambodia, or in any case, when you left when you no longer were living, when you stopped living in Cambodia, and up to the 17th of April 1975, did you receive any kind of news from Khieu Samphan? Well, answer, when he left Phnom Penh to go underground in 1967, I was in Malaysia. And then, after that, I had no direct contact with him up until 1990. Question, thank you. So, if I understood correctly, there is approximately a 23-year period during which you had no contact with Khieu Samphan, and during which you knew very little about his role and about his activities and his ideological convictions, and in particular, you had very little understanding, or you did not know if his political convictions or ideological stances had changed since you knew him. You're absolutely right. I did not have any contact with him, and I was not indeed able to follow his ideological developments, if there were any. Fine, says the co-prosecutor. In your written statement, you made a certain number of observations and personal analysis, in particular as of Section 9, which focuses on the reasons why Khieu Samphan was appointed head of state, as well as on the role of the head of state in a communist regime. And your conclusion is, and you title it just like a judge, as my intimate conviction. So, since this analysis is based on a period during which you had no contact with Khieu Samphan, can you agree to the fact that this analysis might be a bit subjective, or that it might be based somewhat on speculation? Answer, I would say that these are indeed hypotheses based on what I knew of Khieu Samphan in the past, and based on what I was able to see of him and hear from him in the year 2000 and after. Fine, I'd like to be perfectly clear. Let me take an example. You wrote in your statement E190/2.5 French ERN 00809329, and let me repeat, 00809329. In Khmer, it's on page 00907765 00907665, and this is what you wrote, and I quote, "It was probable that Khieu Samphan, who was not a member of the Standing Committee of the Communist Party of Cambodia, did not wield much more power than his predecessor, Prince Norodom Sihanouk, who was head of state from 1975 to 1976. End of quote. So my question is the following. Do you know, witness, if late Norodom Sihanouk was a member of the CPK, member of the Central Committee, or if he attended most meetings of the Standing Committee? Answer, I'm completely unaware of that, and I'm completely unaware of late King Sihanouk's contacts in 1975 and 1976, but however, I know that he went to Cambodia in the early 1970s. He was living in Beijing at that period, but he traveled at least once to Cambodia, and he met then Pol Pot, Khieu Samphan, etc. and I even saw a photograph of this meeting. Fine, says the co-prosecutor. Earlier you spoke about Sirik Matak as being one of the shareholders in your corporation when you were in Cambodia. Have you ever heard or read a speech by Khieu Samphan that he made around April 1975, that is saying the weeks just before, whose object was that there were traitors and super traitors, of which Sirik Matak was part of? Answer: I am not aware of this speech nor of any other kind of speech that was made by Khieu Samphan or by anyone else. I know that Sirik Matak had participated with Lon Nol in the destitution of Prince Sihanouk in March 1970. Fine, says the co-prosecutor. When you answered a question by Judge Lavergne earlier, you said that you did not know, or in any case, Khieu Samphan had never told you, having been a member or having presided over the Marxist circle, or having been a member of the French Communist Party. So did you learn of this later? Did you learn later that Khieu Samphan had been a member of the French Communist Party or of this Marxist-Leninist circle, or did you just learn this today, during today's hearing? And I suspected it, but I only learned it officially today, during today's hearing. As you may wonder, did you ask yourself if in reality you knew Khieu Samphan as well as you thought, or if there was something that was hidden in Khieu Samphan that he never revealed to you? Answer: I met Khieu Samphan several times, as I told you, and when I met him, I grew to appreciate him very much, as well as other Cambodians in Paris then, and my appreciation grew when I was in Cambodia, and when I saw the way he conducted his political activities. I'd like to remind you that he first was a parliamentarian in Norodom Sihanouk's party, and that he was then re-elected a second time without the support of Norodom Sihanouk, which proves that the local population appreciated him more than the other candidates.
President, court officer, could you coordinate with the AV unit regarding the interference on the voice from France? President, the prosecution, you may now continue with your questioning of this witness. And please repeat your last question. Thank you.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Mr. President, I believe that the last question I put to the witness was answered. So if I may move on to the next one. Unless you did not hear the answer, well, I would like to quickly revisit the issue of the Constitution. Earlier today, you told us that you were shocked by what you had read regarding culture in the Constitution. And I would like to quote what you said on page 2 of your written statement. More specifically, I saw the onslaught against the culture that I became impregnated with during my studies at l'École des Langues Orientales, a culture based on respect for the family, religion, and traditions. A culture described in Article 3 of the Constitution of 5 January 1976 of Democratic Cambodia as corrupt and reactionary, which the new culture is absolutely opposed to, end of quote. Well, you were not very explicit when describing what shocked you about this. You simply repeated what you had already written. So could you tell us a little bit more about your reaction, especially since the family of your wife is Cambodian? And so could you tell us how this Article 3 and what you wrote here is something that was very shocking to you? Answer. Well, the Khmer Rouge, in my opinion, wanted to transform society radically. And I do not support this kind of solution at all, because this solution attacks traditional values that I support, such as respecting family, respecting education, and training. So I was indeed shocked to learn later on, when we discovered what had happened in Cambodia. It's not then, it was after, because of course I was not at all aware of what was going on in Cambodia at the time, from 75 to 79. So it's only 5 or 10 years later that I was absolutely flabbergasted. And you mentioned religion as well, says the co-prosecutor, on top of family tradition and culture. And I would like maybe to read to you again Article 20 of the Constitution that states the following, free translation: each citizen of Democratic Cambodia is entitled to have beliefs and religion, and also has the right to have neither creed nor religion. And it is strictly any kind of reactionary religion harming Democratic Cambodia is strictly forbidden. And end of quote. And I'd like now to return to the document that was mentioned by Judge Laverne before, document E3/273, E3/273, which is not only a speech but especially a report from Khieu Samphan, who was the Deputy Prime Minister, on 14 December 1975 regarding the project for a new constitution before this constitution was adopted by the Third National Congress. And this is what Khieu Samphan says regarding religion. Free translation, and I quote, Khmer ERN 0065 74 50, and I repeat 0065 50, French 00 72 7802 0072 5802, English 00 16 78 16 00 16 78 16. And I quote what Kyo Sampan. Article 20 of Chapter 15, Free Translation, states that our people are allowed to follow the religion of their choice, no matter their religion, and also has the right not to follow any religion. This is a new form of freedom for our people. And furthermore, as was announced in our Constitution, our aim is not to allow foreign imperialists, no matter who they are, to use religion for subversive ends. We are determined to fight the imperialists, no matter the artifices they resort to. The imperialists keep on looking for means to attack us, in particular by using religion to infiltrate our country. So therefore, we must fight them at all costs. And regarding religion, did Kyo Sampan ever speak to you about religion, whether it be in the 1990s or whether it be in the year 2000? I don't remember that we spoke about religion in a particularly extensive way. I believe that some of the criticisms that he brought up are fair, insofar that a certain number of American missionaries would give candy to little children so that they would follow religious education. And many missionaries, based on what I was told, were more or less connected to the CIA. They had been sent into the countryside, and they were able to understand what was going on clearly because they spoke Khmer. I'm speaking about American missionaries in the 1950s and the 1960s. Co-prosecutor, in the conclusion of your statement, you state that Kyo Sampan did not participate in activities that resembled the Cultural Revolution and did not foster them, nor did he initiate them, even less. You say, of course, that these are personal speculations. However, when you read this Constitution from 5 January 1976, which wanted to shake up Khmer culture completely, wasn't this the sign of a true cultural revolution? Answer. Let me specify that I did not read the Constitution in detail. I simply typed in Cambodia head of state, Democratic Kampuchea on the internet, and I ended up on Article 11. And yes, indeed, it was a cultural revolution. And however, I continue believing that Kyo Sampan neither supported the Chinese-style Great Leap Forward nor the Chinese-style Cultural Revolution. But not as Pol Pot and the others who admired China. And they, in turn, wanted to usher in the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution at the same time, which led to the humanitarian disaster we are all aware of. I'm not going to return to this, says the co-prosecutor. I think it's quite clear. Earlier, you said that some of your Cambodian friends had probably died at S21 because you had seen a list of people who had been detained there and executed, but you do not remember which one of your friends were on this list. And did you learn that if people were sent to S21, they were considered as enemies or traitors? I do not know why. These people were suppressed, but I suppose They were charges against them, and they were, all of them practically wanted Cambodia to develop politically and to lead to a more efficient regime economically speaking. But whatever charges were held against them, I'm completely unaware of them. And however, did you know if Sun Kaset, Yung Sopan, Toch Kamdun, Tipon, and others had not only been active in Paris, but had also been members of the Communist Party of Kampuchea? I know that Toch Kamdun attended meetings in Europe when he was a student, before 1960, meetings that had been organized by international communist authorities. But as far as the others, I don't know. I would not be surprised that some indeed were members of the French Communist Party when they were in France. But as far as Cambodia, and I don't know if they were members of it. At the time, I think the Communist Party of Cambodia was called Prachechun, people. Thank you. Now, regarding the enemies, I wish to refer to one single document. There are several, but I will limit myself to one, E3/201. E3/201. It is an excerpt of Khieu Samphan's speech from 15 April 1977 at a mass meeting for the second anniversary of the victory of 17 April 1975. And it's on English page 0041 9517 0041 9517 Khmer 00292813-14 00292813-14 and French 00612172 00612172. And Khieu Samphan says the following: we must permanently keep our revolutionary vigilance awake against enemies of all kinds, at home as well as abroad, in order to defend democratic Kampuchea, protect the worker peasant administration, and preserve the fruits of our revolution resolutely and permanently. End of quote. So, did Khieu Samphan in the 1990s or in the year 2000s, did he ever explain to you that there had been enemies from within and enemies from outside, or what revolutionary vigilance meant? Answer: I don't know if it is Khieu Samphan who spoke to me about this first, or if it was someone else, but it is clear that during centuries, Cambodia was the prey of enemies, Thailand and Vietnam, and Vietnam, supported by the USSR, wished to take over Cambodia after. So I believe that what is written regarding enemies from outside can be applied to the Vietnamese and to Vietnam, and the enemies from within probably applies to Cambodians who had been brought in 1954 by the Vietnamese to North Vietnam, where they were trained in order to be their spearhead in Cambodia.
Question. Following 1979, and before 1990, when you saw Khieu Samphan for the first time after all that long period, did he ever talk to you about what happened to Cambodian refugees and what they said as they were fleeing towards Thailand, Vietnam, or France? You referred earlier to François Panchaud's book, who has undertaken and achieved a massive gathering of testimony of refugees. Did Khieu Samphan tell you anything at that encounter? Answer. There were 2 refugee camps that he had been to close to the sea in 1980, and I do not recall the names of those locations. I do recall that I had met with the refugees, the interpreter corrects, and with some friends and Colonel Saint-Simon, we established a small organization to help those refugees find work and set up proper living conditions. With respect to numbers, many numbers and figures, significant figures had been circling about. I know that during the 1980s, Mr. Kim Yun-trak, the Foreign Affairs Minister of Vietnam, was in Paris. He was on a mission, and he was part of a conference being organized by the CNPF. And he cited a death toll of 3 million. I believe that the Vietnamese, in an attempt to justify their invasion of Cambodia, had inflated the number of the dead. I do not know the number of those who died. However, during the 1970 to 1975 period, because of the American bombings, there were deaths. And during the 1975-1979 period, there were those who were eliminated or those who perished because of lack of medication and malnourishment. And following the invasion of Vietnam in Cambodia in January 1979, there were people who fled, and those people were killed or who lost their lives by walking on mines. I do not know the exact numbers, but I know that there are several categories of victims. Question. Did you read or did you know about what Khieu Samphan said about the number of Khmer Rouge victims, in particular during an interview with Western journalists, with a certain Marsh Clark from the Times magazine in an article dated the 1st of March 1980. I'm going to read an excerpt before asking you the question. This is E3/628. ERN in French 007400915. English ERN 00524517. And in Khmer 00709544. The journalist writes as follows. How many people were eliminated during the revolution? Khieu Samphan's answer. All I can tell you is that the number was not more than 10,000. Question. So you're saying that the almost unanimous testimony of refugees in Thailand and that of other witnesses is incorrect? Answer. They are not correct. Very few people were against us. And further on in the article, he states, there's absolutely no certainty. The Vietnamese are responsible for some 2 million victims. Mr. Witness, did you ever have the opportunity to talk with Mr. Khieu Samphan during the 1990s and during the 2000s on the specific topic of the statistics of those who died under the Democratic Kampuchea regime, or as a result of poor treatment, disease, malnourishment, or other reasons? Response. I never had the opportunity to talk about the death toll. During our meetings and during our conversations, which very often did not last a long time, we talked about the future of Cambodia. We talked about the current predicament of Cambodia. We also talked about the country's future. We rarely touched upon the 1975-1979 period. I do believe that there were a certain number of people who were eliminated, and those who were able to oppose the capture of Phnom Penh, who were corralled in various manners and then massacred. There were many who did die before the Vietnamese invasion, and that was due to the very difficult work conditions and living conditions. As for the total death toll, I am completely unaware of the exact figure. The co-prosecutor, one last question. Earlier on, you stated that you were reluctant to talk about certain topics with Mr. Khieu Samphan. You were reluctant to talk about the 1975-1979 period during your meetings in recent decades. And yet it was almost 30 years after the events. Therefore, my question is, what barred you from filling in the details? What prevented you from asking about what had happened in Cambodia, particularly in light of the fact that you have Cambodian family members? You were in Cambodia and you did have a personal stake. Response: we seldom talked about the past. I traveled to China on several different occasions, and I observed that the Chinese who had lived through the Cultural Revolution never talked about the Cultural Revolution. I decided to adhere to this convention. When I traveled to Cambodia, I noticed that Cambodians were quite restrained or reluctant to talk about the 1975 to 1979 period. The co-prosecutor, I understand, but the situations in both countries are not identical, depending on whether you were referring to the victims of a regime or a former head of state of a regime who may have been responsible for the death of several millions, and I would put the figure of 1.7 million deaths to you. Therefore, how could you be so deliberate in avoiding such a topic? Wouldn't that cause a conflict of consciousness in your mind? Response: no. That never gave rise to any personal dilemma of consciousness. We talked about the ongoing situation in Cambodia at the time as was relevant. Therefore, yes, I was quite purposeful in not raising the subject. The co-prosecutor: Mr. President, I have no further questions to put to the witness. However, I would like to hand the floor over to my national colleague before we hand the floor over to our civil party colleagues. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Your Honors. Good afternoon, everyone in and around the courtroom. Good afternoon, Mr. Julian Goffres. My name is Chandra Rasmai, representing the National Prosecutor. I have additional questions in addition to the questions put to you by my international colleague. Did you hear about the events taking place between 1975 to 79, although you were not in Cambodia? Did you hear about the events that took place inside Cambodia between that period?
J'en ai fort peu entendu.
At the time, Cambodia was closed off. I did not hear about what was being said. There were very few foreigners in Cambodia. It was only in 1978 that there was a group of Yugoslav journalists who were authorized to enter Cambodia. And at the time, at the very least in France, very little was said about Cambodia. There were only a few journalists who, in 1975, celebrated the arrival of the Khmer Rouge to power. I recall a media article that was published in 1975 entitled "Cambodia Liberated." There was a certain degree of sympathy among intellectuals following the arrival to power of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia and the destitution of King Sihanouk.
Thank you. You just stated that the relatives of your wife and some of your friends disappeared. Can you tell us, between 1975 to 1979, did any of your wife's family members or relatives tell you about the events that took place in Cambodia? And if so, what were they?
Very well. In 1979, one of my brothers-in-law was able to escape with his family. They left Cambodia and they arrived in the Udong camp before arriving in France. I held many conversations with many refugees, and I arrived at the conclusion that the situation was very different depending on the region and depending on the Khmer Rouge official in power. There were some refugees who were very poorly treated, other regions where the conditions were not so hard. In some cases, the price to pay was very heavy.
Question. Thank you. I read your letter document E190.2.5 on page number 4 in French. In French 00809025, Khmer 00907758. In that letter, you say that in 1990 you met Khieu Samphan in the block where the Khmer Rouge lived in Paris. Is that true?
I met Mr. Khieu Samphan in 1990. I do not recall the exact date, but yes, it was in the former offices of the Khmer Rouge at the Place de Barcelone, in the building that had been given to the coalition government. And so that is correct. That is where I met Khieu Samphan at the time.
Question. Thank you. Was that was that encounter the first encounter with Mr. Kyo Sampon, and what did you discuss with him?
C'était la première.
Yes, indeed. It was the first encounter since 1966. We talked about our families. We talked about what they had become. The conversation was rather brief since Mr. Kyo Sampon was very busy at the time. He was in the midst of preparing the Paris Accords. I think he was getting ready for a meeting with the former French Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Roland Dumas. So my conversation with him was not very lengthy.
Question. Thank you. Can you tell the chamber, please, was the office for Funk and Grung established in Paris already? And what was the purpose of the establishment of such office, and who was in charge?
I'm aware that the offices in Paris at the Place de Barcelone were made available to various governments with which the Khmer Rouge were involved. It didn't serve as an embassy per se. It served as a place to hold unofficial meetings with French figures or others. That's what I presume.
Question. Thank you. In 1990, were you aware that Kyo Sampon traveled to this area, the Place de Barcelone in Paris, and if you knew, how did you know about this?
I do not recall at all how I learned of this. Was it through other Cambodians or through French media and newspapers? I do not remember. However, I do recall having received a phone call and given an appointment.
Question. Thank you. I would like to ask you another question. In 2005 and 2006, you said you paid a visit to Mr. Kyo Sampon and stayed with the family in Thailand. How long or how many days did you spend staying with the family, and what kind of topics of discussion did you have with the family back then?
I believe that I spent approximately 2 to 3 days in Pailin in 2005, and I visited An Long Veng in 2006. We covered a lot of things, mainly personal matters. We talked about the living conditions in Pailin, the farming conditions, and in An Long Veng we visited the Priya Vihir temple. We talked about this and that, but we never delved into one particular subject. It would have been almost 40 years since our last encounter, so we were re-establishing our friendly ties before carrying out deeper and sustained conversations.
Question. Thank you. During the time when you stayed with this family in Pailin and on Long Wang, did you meet with other Khmer Rouge leaders? If so, what did you talk to them?
Non.
No. No. I never met with any other Khmer Rouge leader. I believe that, or at least I was told that Mr. Ieng Sary was in Pailin. The governor was a former bodyguard, but he orbited in a very different world than that of Mr. Khieu Samphan. I did not wish to have any contact with any other Cambodian leaders or figures.
Question. Thank you. Can you also tell the chamber, please, what made Khieu Samphan join the Democratic Cambodia? Did he ever talk to you about this objective?
Si vous permettez, je vais...
If you will, I will supplement my answer to the previous question by saying that during my stay in Pailin and An Long Veng, I met with some officials, I met with peasants, I met with soldiers, I met with Cambodian as well as Thai soldiers, all of whom held Mr. Khieu Samphan in high esteem. With respect to the question you're asking me now, I know that Khieu Samphan held what can be called very progressive ideas. However, he left Phnom Penh in 1967. I was no longer there. He left with two other members of parliament, Hu Yum and Hu Nim. Those two members disappeared during the 1975 to 1978-79 period. I'm also of the belief that Mr. Khieu Samphan did not suffer the same demise as Hu Nim and Hu Yun, and that is because the Khmer Rouge government needed him as a figurehead to serve as head of state.
Question. Thank you. I have only 3 remaining questions before I conclude this questioning time. And my next question is, Did Mr. Kilsompon explain to you the reason he accepted the position he was offered, the president of the state presidium position and other positions he was holding at that time? Did he ever mention about this to you when you met him?
We never broached the topic. We never talked about it. But if he accepted these functions, it was because he truly believed it would be of use for his country and for his people.
Question. Thank you. The next question is, you talked about Mr. Kilsompon's personal conduct and his popularity, and you also explained a lot in your letter and in your testimony that Mr. Kilsompon was the most popular person, the most respectful, and the most admired individual person who was greatly admired by the people, and that happened even in 1960s. Now, can you tell the chamber, please, whether such popularity and quality that you mentioned about Mr. Kilsompon remains the same during the entire period, over the last 30 years? Co-prosecutor, I believe that our message was not conveyed. I may ask this question again. Mr. Witness, you mentioned about Mr. Kilsompon's personal conduct and his popularity, and you explained a lot in your letter and in this testimony that Mr. Kilsompon was the most popular, respectful, and a person of quality, and he was greatly admired by the people. And that happened in 1960s. My question to you is, does this quality of Mr. Kilsompon that you described remain with him over the last 10 years, or has this changed already?
Well, I noticed when I was Pailin and at Along Vang and Privy here, that the officials who had accompanied me in Pailin, the Cambodian and Thai servicemen that we met close to the border, they were in a joint mission, as well as with the peasants that we met in An Long Vang and Privy here, that they all showed appreciation for Kilsompon. I heard no insult from these people, nor any form of criticism.
Co-prosecutor, I thank you very much indeed, Mr. Witness, and I thank you for your responses. We believe that your testimony will have ascertained the truth, and we wish you all the very best. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you, Mr. President and Your Honors, for allowing me the opportunity to put the questions to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Prosecutor.
The President, next we would like to hand over to the legal lawyers for the civil parties. Counsel Pick Ong. Thank you, Mr. President. Counsels Lau Chun Thi and Counsel Simonofo will be putting questions to this witness. The President, you may proceed. Counsel Lau Chun Thi. Good afternoon, Mr. President, and good afternoon, Your Honors, and good afternoon to everyone. I am Lau Chun Thi from Legal Aid of Cambodia. I am here representing civil parties. Good afternoon, Mr. Witness. I have some questions for you, please.
Good afternoon, Counsel.
I am now referring to your letter in which you mentioned about your relationship with Mr. Kyusampon, and that relationship was built even from 1957. My first question to you is that you said you met Mr. Kyusampon in Paris. And Mr. Kyusampon was doing a PhD degree, and I would like to know whether you know what kind of a degree was that. The President, please hold on, Counsel. We appear to have some technical glitch, and we will get back to you soon after it is fixed.
Hello. Welcome to the
The President, Council, you may now proceed, but please repeat your last question. Council Lao Junti, thank you, Mr. President, and good afternoon again to Mr. Witness. I would like to now recall the event you mentioned in your letter that you met with Mr. Khieu Samphan in Paris in 1957 when he was doing his PhD degree course in Paris. My question to you, what was the subject of Mr. Khieu Samphan's study for his degree in Paris?
Good afternoon. I did not read his dissertation, but I believe it was on economics. And I believe that the topic was the desired development of Cambodia's economy.
Question. Thank you. That leads to my next question. You said you knew what happened on the 17th of April 1975. You learned that Phnom Penh dwellers were evacuated like the other people in other cities, and that the evacuation was part of the solution to the food shortages. Do you share the view that such evacuation would result in the hardship that the evacuees would encounter? Because during the course of the evacuation, no proper transportation was provided and people were not offered decent services. The President, the internet connection is not very good. Can Council please hold on? The President, Council, you may now continue, and the Council, please be reminded that time is limited, and you may have 5 more minutes, and we add these 5 minutes to you because of the technical glitch we had just experienced. Council Junti, thank you, Mr. President. I will be very brief then. I was asking the witness this question. He mentioned about the food solution and the evacuation, and the question was that do you think there would be any other options other than having to evacuate the people from the cities, because that would be resulting in hardship for the people.
Well, I was not in Cambodia in 1975, but I was there in 1974. And then the country had been devastated by the civil war. There was practically no harvests, and a great part of the population sought refuge in the cities, and they were supplied by boat and by plane from the outside, in particular by the Americans. So the other solution was for the Russians or Chinese or Singaporeans, for example, replace the Americans in supplying food to the population. But this was not the solution that was sought.
Council, thank you. I have my final question due to time constraints. This last question is, you have had contact with Mr. Khieu Samphan even before 1957 and recently. Can you describe to the chamber whether you can see a change in his behavior during the time you met him in 1957 and the last time you saw him?
I did not notice any major change. I noticed that he still had faith in Cambodia, in that Cambodia would develop, and he was still very patriotic. And if he was head of state in 1976, it was maybe in part because he was obliged to take on that position, but also because he was trying to limit the damage that he noticed back then in Cambodia.
Council Junti, thank you very much, Mr. Witness, and I would like to now hand over to my colleague to continue putting the questions, and I thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors. Good afternoon to all of you, and good morning to you, witness. I'm going to ask you a few questions on what interests me. That is to say, Mr. Khieu Samphan's role and what became of him from 1976 to 1979. Corrects the interpreter. But you said that you hadn't seen Mr. Khieu Samphan from 1966 to 1990, and you said also that after 1990, when you met him, neither you nor he had spoken once about what had happened between 75 and 79 in Cambodia. And you also said that you did not know the details of his life from 75 to 79. Thus, I notice that your statement does not provide anything on what Mr. Khieu Samphan was between 1967 and 1979, nor about his role. So since you cannot shed any light on all of this, I will not put any questions to you. I still would like to thank you for having made yourself available for today's hearing. And I noted, however, when you answered a question, that you had learned something during today's proceedings, and I'm delighted.
President, thank you. The National Council for Kisampon, you may proceed. Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make an observation regarding the statement made by the international lead co-lawyers to make her conclusion. And this is not the time for her to make such a statement. It is time for questioning the witness. Thank you. President, thank you for your timely observation, Council. Nunchi's defense team, do you have any question to put to this witness?
No, thank you, Mr. President.
President, thank you, Council. Mr. Julong Philip, the hearing of your testimony has now concluded. The judges of the trial chamber and all the parties have no further questions for you, and we thank you very much for your valuable time to testify before this chamber for this afternoon session with perseverance and effort. Your testimony may contribute to finding the truth in this case. And we wish you all the best, good health and prosperity. And goodbye.
Mr. President, Your Honors, prosecutors, lawyers, Mr. Kisampon, thank you very much for having listened to me.
Thank you. Every unit, you may now disconnect the video conferencing to France. The chamber would like now to make an oral decision regarding the request by the lead co-lawyers on the statement of harms to be made by the civil parties. Yesterday, we heard this oral submission from all the parties concerning the request whether the civil party shall be questioned by the prosecution or the defense teams. During the hearing of the statement of harm by the victim, which will be scheduled to be heard from the 27th of May, that is from next week. There has been a major consent amongst all the parties, and the chamber decides that the parties may question the civil parties on relevant factual issues subject to the time limitations already announced. The Chamber wishes to remind the parties that the general framework for the presentation of civil party testimony, including statements of suffering, was set forth recently in document E-267/3. Considering the co-prosecutors and defense will be granted an opportunity to ask questions, The Chamber will not grant an additional opportunity to comment on civil party statements of suffering. The victim impact hearing is scheduled for 27th, 29th, and 30th May and 4th June. One session, that is 75 minutes, will be devoted to each civil party, with the lead co-lawyers having 2/3 of the time available in that session, and the remainder is to be divided among the OCP and the two defense teams. Any civil party who wishes to put a question to an accused must do so during the time allocated to the lead co-lawyers. During these 4 days of testimony, the Chamber will modify its sitting hours slightly in order to permit two civil parties to testify in the morning and two other civil parties to testify in the afternoon. The sitting times will be emailed to the parties. As noted yesterday, the Chamber has agreed to an extension of time to hear the testimony of the expert TCE 12. He will be heard on the afternoon of 5th June. The time will be allocated 2/3 to the lead co-lawyers and the remainder among the three other parties. No extension of time will be granted to the lead co-lawyers. This is the oral decision on the request made by the lead co-lawyers yesterday. The hearing today has come to a conclusion, and we will adjourn the hearing now and will resume tomorrow, that is Wednesday the 22nd of May 2013, commencing from 9 a.m. We will hear the testimony of Prum Su, who will be questioned by the two defense teams, starting from Kieu Samporn's team first. Security guards were instructed to take the two accused, that is Kieu Samporn and Nuon Chea, back to the detention facility and have them returned to the courtroom tomorrow morning prior to 9 a.m. And as for Nuon Chea, bring him to the holding cell downstairs, which is equipped with the audio-video communication for him to participate and follow the proceeding. The court is now in recess.
Doctor.